He sold his soul for power, but he thought he had a foolproof escape clause. The contract said the devil could only steal his soul in the city of Rome. Since he never planned to go to Italy, he thought he was safe. He walked Kraków like a king. He mocked the demons. But hell has a cruel sense of humor. One night, he walked into a local tavern and looked up at the sign above the door. The inn was named Rome. And that technicality didn't just kill him, it trapped him on the moon forever. To understand why a man ends up on the moon instead of in hell, we have to start with the file everyone argues about. Pan Twardowski. He sits in that strange space between history and myth. Some witnesses call him a nobleman, wrapped in rich robes, moving through the streets of Kraków like he owns them. Others swear he was an alchemist, a scholar hunched over strange books and smoking glass vessels. The details change with each telling, but one thing never does. He wanted knowledge. Not polite curiosity, obsession. Books, stars, herbs, forbidden names. He chased the kind of secrets people only whisper about after dark. Picture old Kraków, narrow streets, candlelight leaking from tavern windows, smoke, wine, and rumors in the air. Somewhere above the noise, a single room where Twardowski studies long after everyone else sleeps. He turns pages written in Latin and symbols no one recognizes. He tries experiments his neighbors don't understand. Animals heal too quickly. Weather changes without warning. He is clever, and he is hungry. Early fragments of the story say he met a spirit he couldn't control. Later versions sharpen the accusation. He doesn't just bump into darkness, he invites it in. He signs a pact with the devil. One decision, inked in blood or shadow, starts a chain of stories that refuses to die. Most versions of the bargain agree on the basics. Twardowski wants what no university and no priest can give him: hidden knowledge and power. The devil, or something that wears the devil's face, offers exactly that. In return, his soul, taken later. The small print shifts from teller to teller. In some accounts, the devil can claim him after 7 years. In others, there's a single condition: the soul can only be taken when you go to Rome. The devil in these stories is not the roaring monster from church paintings. He's patient. He smiles. He lets Twardowski think he's still in control. The name changes: Lucifer, Mephistopheles, a nameless, dark gentleman. But the structure stays the same: a clever man, a tempting offer, a deadline wrapped in a puzzle. And Twardowski? He is not painted as a fool. He reads the contract. He studies the condition. He decides he can outsmart it. He signs. Some say he uses blood, others black ink mixed with strange powders. But the result is the same. The pact is sealed. Suddenly, doors start opening. He gains influence. His experiments work. He seems untouchable. People whisper that he can heal the sick, twist luck, bend events. He becomes the man nobles quietly visit at night and never mention in daylight. But the higher he climbs, the more the bargain presses on him. Friends grow distant. Rumors grow darker. Fear starts walking a step behind his success. What does a man do when he realizes he has given away everything for power? And the bill is coming due. Twardowski leans on the very thing that led him into danger: his cleverness. He uses the devil's gifts brilliantly. He pulls off little miracles that make him look like a saint or a sorcerer. He wins games no one else can win. He turns enemies into allies or into corpses, depending on the version. For a while, it looks like he has beaten the system. Then, the due date arrives. The devil comes to collect. This is where the story snaps into its most famous trick. Twardowski is bound to lose his soul if he ever goes to Rome. So, he decides he will never go to Rome. Simple. He stays in Poland. He walks the streets of Kraków with forced calm, carefully avoiding any journey that might come close to the Eternal City. But there's another detail. In some tellings, he finds a tavern in Kraków with a very special name. Rzym, Polish for Rome. He hides there, thinking he has found a loophole, a way to live under the devil's nose and still say he never went to the real Rome. In others, he doesn't even know what he's walking into. One night he steps through a tavern door, wipes the road dust from his boots, and only then looks up at the sign. Rzym, Rome. The moment hangs in the air. The devil arrives. The devil in this scene changes costumes depending on who is talking. Sometimes he comes as a polished nobleman with cold eyes. Sometimes he's a porter carrying luggage, a priest offering comfort, a stranger at the bar. The disguises shift, but the feeling is the same. Twardowski realizes too late that he has walked into a trap. He tries to stall. He uses clever words, raises new questions about the contract, argues about what Rome really means. For a while, it works. He buys time. Some versions say he forces the devil to perform humiliating tasks, to dance, to sing, to serve. The tavern fills with uneasy laughter, as if everyone knows this game cannot last. Tricks work, for a time. But every clever move Twardowski makes pushes the devil a little further, and pushes himself a little closer to the edge. Finally, patience runs out. The devil drops the mask. The air turns heavy. Chairs scrape back. In some retellings, the tavern falls silent as invisible hands grab Twardowski and drag him toward the door, toward the darkness that has been waiting since the first drop of ink hit the page. And then, the story fractures. In the most famous version, just when hell is about to close its hand around him, something impossible happens. A sudden gust of wind tears through the room. The floor seems to vanish. Twardowski is ripped upward, away from the devil, away from the tavern, away from Kraków itself. He rises through the clouds, higher and higher, until the city is a smear of lights below him. The devil roars in rage, or laughs in admiration, depending on who's telling it. When the motion stops, Twardowski finds himself somewhere no human was meant to stand, on the cold, gray surface of the moon. Craters stretch around him. Silence presses in. Far below hangs the earth, small and unreachable. According to this ending, he is not saved. Not exactly. He's not burning in hell, but he's not home either. He's trapped between worlds, an eternal exile, forever watching the place he tried to rule. Other endings are less forgiving. In some, the devil wins cleanly. The floor opens, Twardowski falls. No moon, no mystery, just a straight descent into fire and shadows. In gentler versions, a prayer interrupts the devil's claim. Someone in the tavern cries out to a saint or to Mary, and that single plea bends the rules. Twardowski is spared, or half spared, punished but not destroyed. Each ending says more about the storyteller than about Twardowski himself. So, was he ever real? Investigators of the legend have been trying to answer that for centuries. When you strip away the devils and the moon, you find scattered clues. In the 1500s and 1600s, alchemists, astrologers, and healers were everywhere in Europe. Kraków was a serious center of learning. Universities, private labs, half-secret societies, all of them played with metals, herbs, and the movement of the stars. It wouldn't take much for a bold, eccentric scholar in that world to become a rumor, then a cautionary tale, than a legend. Old records do mention people with the surname Twardowski. Bits of real names, real addresses, and real professions probably sank into the story like bones under a swamp. But no single document proves that there was one man who signed a literal contract with the devil and vanished into the sky. On top of that, Europe already had another powerful case file, the legend of Faust. A man who sells his soul for knowledge, bargains with a demonic figure, and pays the price. That pattern was familiar long before Twardowski's name appears in Polish tales. It's likely that storytellers took the Faust template, pulled it into Polish streets, gave it Krakow's landmarks and Polish fears, and let it grow. Over time, sermons, jokes, and fireside stories blended into one shape wearing the name, Pan Twardowski. Whatever its origin, the legend did more than just entertain. It shaped how people thought. Writers turned Twardowski into a walking warning about pride and forbidden shortcuts. Folk singers carved his story into songs and ballads that could be learned in minutes and carried across villages. Theaters staged his tricks and his downfall, mixing humor with unease. Paintings and prints showed the moon, the glowing tavern sign, the twisted face of the devil leaning in too close. The city itself became part of the myth. Kraków was no longer just a background, it was the stage. Guides started pointing out Twardowski spots, the streets he was said to walk, the windows where he supposedly worked his spells, and, most famously, inns that claimed some connection to the tavern Jim. Even when the historical trail runs cold, the cultural trail glows in the dark. Tourists stand under signs that echo the old trick. Local guides, each with their own favorite version, retell the story as if it happened last week. The legend left a shadow that the real man, if he ever existed, could never have cast alone. Time didn't kill the story, it mutated it. Modern creators keep dragging Twardowski back into the light, each one changing him to fit their own time and audience. Cartoonists turn him into a mischievous anti-hero. Comic books exaggerate his powers and his duels with the devil. Filmmakers move their cameras through candlelit taverns and up toward painted moons. First with practical effects, then CGI, then animation. On stage, actors play him as both brilliant and terrified, a man who can stare down a demon but shakes when he's alone. Directors use music, colored lights, and shifting backdrops to show the devil's tricks, making the old pact feel new. In children's versions, the moon ending becomes almost gentle, a strange, lonely guardian watching the earth, more sad than terrifying. In horror retellings, the moon is a prison cell with no walls, a perfect punishment because nothing ever changes there. But across almost every version, one image keeps surviving. A man on the moon, looking back at us. Why does that ending refuse to die? Part of it is simple. It's visual. You can see it in your mind immediately. A single figure on a gray, cracked surface. Earth hanging like a lantern in a black sky. No explanation needed. But there's more. The moon is close enough to see, far enough to never touch. It's the perfect symbol for a man who reached too far and ended up out of reach himself. That distance keeps the mystery intact. Did he escape hell, or just trade one prison for another? The moon lets every listener decide. Some hear it as punishment. He wanted the stars, and now he has nothing else, forever. Others hear it as a twisted kind of victory. He slipped past the devil and ended up among the very stars he used to study. And for people who know he chased hidden knowledge, ending his story on a cold, silent satellite feels almost too neat. The sky he once studied from Krakow's rooftops has swallowed him whole. So what's left when we step back from the miracles and the morals? A pattern a man hungry for knowledge, a shortcut offered by something dark, a loophole that looks clever until it starts to close around him. The story has been used to scare children away from dangerous curiosity, to warn adults against deals that seem too good, to explore the tension between faith and science, and even to mock human arrogance. But beneath all that, there's a quieter question. How far would you go? Not just to know more, but to feel untouchable. Twardowski's legend doesn't give a single answer. It hands you a file thick with conflicting testimonies and asks you to decide what you think he deserved. Stories like this don't survive for centuries just because they're entertaining. They survive because they leave something unfinished. Pan Twardowski wanted secret knowledge and quick power. He made a pact with a dark force. He used the devil's help and walked the world like it couldn't touch him. He tried to cheat the terms, most famously with that tavern trick, tied to the name Zim. The endings refuse to agree. Some send him to the moon, some drop him into hell, some whisper that prayer bent the rules. And yet, behind all the noise, there's one detail you rarely hear in the tourist-friendly versions. In some small towns, away from the big city tours, there's a quieter telling. It mentions a hidden notebook, a final spell, a line cut off mid-sentence, as if the writer was interrupted. If that notebook ever existed, it wouldn't just prove that Twardowski was more than a legend. It could rewrite the whole story of how his bargain ended. Some say it was burned by priests. Some say it's buried in a wall, sealed behind bricks in a house no one thinks to question. Some say it vanished with him the night he disappeared. Either way, the file isn't closed. The question remains: did Pan Twardowski truly escape his fate, or is the real ending still out there, waiting to be found?